In this video, we're going to practice finding slope from tables. So here I have 4 tables. Each one's a little bit different, but we're going to use the same method each time. Now we've learned 2 methods for how to find slope from a table in class. One way works pretty well most of the time, but there are some tables you run into where it can be a little tricky. So for the purpose of keeping this video fairly short, I'm going to stick with the second method we learned, which will work for our purposes in 8th grade, will work every single time. And that method is going to be the slope formula. And I'm going to write it up here. So it is m, or slope, equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And to successfully use this method, you're going to have to get familiar with labeling numbers so that you can substitute them into this formula correctly. So we're going to call this problem number 1 and start with this table. So all I'm going to have to do is pick some values to represent y2, y1, x2, and x1. So you can pick any numbers you want. I'm going to stick with, try to stick with as many positive values as possible. May use 0 as well. So I'm going to let 0 be x1 and 7 be y1. I'm going to let 1 be x2 and 9 be y2. And once you've selected these values here to substitute into the formula, it's just a matter of substituting them in, subtracting, and then dividing if needed. So I'm going to rewrite the starting part of the formula here, but I'm going to go ahead and replace the variables with our selected values. So y2 is 9, y1 is 7, so on top we're going to have 9 minus 7. On the bottom, as you can see up here, we have x2 minus x1, so I'm going to use x2, which my selected value for that is 1, and then minus 0. And then when we subtract on top, we have 9 minus 7. That gives us a numerator of 2. And then on the bottom, 1 minus 0 is 1 for our denominator, which means if we simplify this, we have a slope of 2. And that would be our answer. All right, so we're going to move on to number 2 here. And again, I'm going to select some values to substitute into my slope formula. I'm going to pick some values from the top this time. So let's say that negative 3 is x1, positive 5 is y1, negative 2 is x2, and positive 2 is y2. And then I'm going to simply take those values and substitute them again up here into this formula. Okay, so on top we're going to have y2 minus y1, that'll be 2 minus 5. And you can see those values over here. And then on the bottom, we're going to have x2 minus x1. So this is where it gets tricky. You have to do negative 2 minus is already in the formula. And then if you look right here, that 3 is negative. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in parentheses. You have to be very careful with that. So on top, we have 2 minus 5. That is negative 3. And then on the bottom, if we add the opposite, we'll have 2 negatives plus 3 positives. That gives me 1 positive, and this slope will simplify to negative 3. Moving on down to table number 3. Again, I'm going to select some values. You can actually pick values that aren't even, consecutive values. So I could select, 1 here to be x1, negative 17 to be y1, and then select the very last values in the table. Like 5 will be x2 and negative 1 will be y2. So in this case, we substitute in our values again. We're going to have y2 is negative 1 and y1 is negative 17. And then on the bottom, we're going to have 5 minus 1. And that gives us, if we add the opposite on top, that gives us 1 negative plus 17 positives. That gives us positive 16. And on the bottom, 5 minus 1 is 4. So we get 16 over 4, and that gives us a slope of 4 when we simplify. Lastly, table number 4. A lot of negatives here. You may want to pick the ones you feel most comfortable with. I may stick with the ones up here at the top, but you can certainly pick any of them. Just make sure that you pair them up appropriately. I'm going to let negative 6 be x1, negative 4 be y1, negative 5 is x2, and negative 9 is y2. And if we substitute these values into the slope formula, we get negative 9 minus, in parentheses, negative 4. And then for our x values, we have negative 5 minus negative 6. And once we have this, I'm going to go ahead and add the opposite top and bottom. So we get 9 negatives plus 4 positives gives me 5 negatives, or negative 5. And then in the denominator, 5 negatives plus 6 positives gives me positive 1. So it looks like our final slope is negative 5. And that's how you find slope, or this is how you use the slope formula to find slope from tables.